Hello, this is Domenico with Easynomics, and today we're going to look at a higher level topic under microeconomics, looking at the demand curve and the assumptions underlining the demand curve. You can search for this video by using this magnifying glass, searching for 2.1 demand, and you'll see videos associated with that component of the economic guide. You can also scroll down, and under microeconomics, it's under the playlist for demand, supply, and competitive market, which you can see here. So here's the full playlist for this introduction to demand, supply, competitive market, equilibrium. This video is going to be towards the top because this is a foundation of understanding demand. In addition, higher level students should not be confusing what we're going to learn in this video with later what you're going to learn in macroeconomics. In macroeconomics, I have another video highlighting the negative slope of the aggregate demand curve and the underlying assumptions of the wealth effect, not to be confused with the income effect, which we're going to discuss in this video for micro. Within macro, you will learn about the international trade effect, which looks at the global trading economy and how countries are offering cheaper alternatives, which will relate to micro, the substitution effect, which we're going to discuss in this video. And in this video, we'll look at the law of diminishing marginal utility or diminishing marginal benefit. And in macro, there's a concept called the interest rate effect, which is not really related to the law of diminishing marginal benefit. But in any case, you as a high level student do not want to mix and confuse these micro concepts with macro concepts. These playlists will be available in the video notes below, so you can find them there. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so here we have 2.1 demand, assumptions underlining the demand curve, HL only. And right now we're going to look at the law of diminishing marginal utility or benefit. It's a law stating that as consumption of a good increases, the additional marginal utility or benefit, the extra utility benefit the consumer receives, decreases with each additional unit consumed. Therefore, consumers will only buy more if the price falls. Okay. So to illustrate the law of diminishing marginal utility, I typically have students eat from a bag of cookies. So here we have this plate of cookies, and on the whiteboard, I'll show the quantity of cookies being consumed, and then I'll ask a student what was the utility, benefit, or satisfaction they got from consuming that cookie. So here we can illustrate the first cookie being consumed. So we'll have a student eat cookie number 1. And on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being maximum satisfaction, I'll ask them, how was that first cookie? And they'll say, yeah, that was quite good. I'll give it a rating of 10. Okay, so go ahead and eat the next cookie, the additional cookie. So that's cookie number 2. And then I'll ask them on a scale of 0 to 10, was that cookie satisfaction the same as the previous cookie, more than, or less than? They'll typically say, oh, maybe it was a little bit less. It's quite good, but not as good as that first cookie. I was quite hungry, got a lot of satisfaction from that first cookie, so I'll give it maybe a 9. Okay, go ahead and eat a third cookie. So they eat the third cookie, and then I'll ask them what was the satisfaction, the same as the previous cookie, less than, more than? So it's a little bit less. I'll give it a rating of, let's say, 7. Okay, so we'll mark that on the whiteboard, and then we'll have the student eat the fourth cookie. And by the fourth cookie, I'll ask them how was the satisfaction from that, from consuming that relative to the previous cookie. So, well, I'm kind of getting full. I'll give it a rating of 5. Okay. Then we'll watch the student eat a fifth cookie, one more unit of a cookie. I'll ask them how was that, and they're getting quite full. The sugar's starting to impact them. They don't feel maybe as good. They're kind of getting a little bit stuffed, so they'll give it a rating benefit of 3. Then they'll eat that sixth cookie, and they'll say, yeah, it's I'm kind of almost done. Not as good. Benefit's definitely going down. I'll give it a benefit of 1. And then I'll ask them, would you like a 7th cookie? And said, nope, I'm good. I'm going to stop. And then knowing that the benefit's going to be at 0, perhaps. So in class, we'll see what's the trend line here. As we consume more of a unit of a good, in this case being cookies, as we're going from 0 cookies all the way to 6 cookies, what do we notice happening to the additional benefit? And they can see, oh, the additional benefit is declining. It's going from a rating of 10 down to ultimately 0 because the student stopped consuming. So the trend line here is downward. And so we say, oh, that's our marginal benefit. The additional benefit we get from consuming additional unit falls and falls and falls and falls. Thus, we can say that the marginal benefit as a formula is equal to the change in the total benefit divided by the change in the number of units consumed. Keep it simple, a change in total benefit over the change in the quantity consumed. So here we can see that as they consumed more, I'll put this in a different color, as they consumed more, as the quantity of consumption was rising, the additional benefit was declining. So here we see a negative relationship between quantity and total benefit. So then it's an underlining aspect of the demand curve. The demand curve is downward sloping because of this negative relationship between price and quantity. And as it says here in the law of diminishing marginal utility, since the additional benefit is decreasing, the consumer will buy more only if the price falls. The only incentive they get for consuming another unit is the price is less. That price, being a reflection of value, they're going to get less value from that good because the benefit from consuming that good is declining and declining and declining. And this explains why we stop doing what we do. You stop eating cookies at a particular point because the benefit's going to hit 0. If you play guitar, you're going to stop playing guitar. You're not going to play guitar infinitely because the satisfaction you're getting goes to 0. If you remember being a kid and always asking for that new toy, and you got that toy, you're not still playing with that toy. It doesn't have infinite satisfaction. Eventually, you exhaust the satisfaction from that toy. It goes to 0, and you move on asking for a new toy. So the law of diminishing marginal utility or benefit is underlining the demand curve. Okay, so higher level students don't necessarily need to draw this, but they need to be able to explain this, to define this law. Great, so now let's move on to let's look at the substitution effect. Okay, so in the substitution effect, we're going to use Coke and Pepsi as our real world examples. And I'm going to move these two, actually, so I can place them over here. So I have a little bit more space. I'll just place these right over here. Be looking at Coke and Pepsi, and I'm going to move this as well. Okay, so let me just create some space here. All right, so this model is a model that standard and higher level students can use when you get into non-price determinants of demand, price of related goods, when you look at substitutes. Okay, so let's create two graphs. Here, let's label them. I'll use some clear labeling. Let's try this, close this. Okay, let's type this as graph A being the market demand for Coke. And let's use a color here. Let's use red for Coke. So graph A being market demand for Coke. I'll make this a little bit smaller. And we'll have another here. We'll have this be Pepsi. So graph B, market demand for Pepsi. There we go. Put this right over here. And let's label our X and Y axis. We'll have a price. Price again over here. And the quantities. Almost there. Just bear with me for a second. And quantity here as well. Okay. So again, this is a model that you can use to demonstrate non-price determinants of demand, and it's also useful for the substitution effect. So the definition for the substitution effect, it's right over here. It states there is a negative causal relationship between price and quantity demanded because as price falls for a good, consumers will buy more. They will buy more of the less expensive alternative good. So as long as there's substitutes around, it's going to keep demand curves relatively downward sloping. So here we're going to have the demand curve for Coke. We're going to label this demand D1 equals marginal benefit 1. And over here we're going to have the demand curve for Pepsi labeled D2 equal to the marginal benefit 2. And then we'll have a price set by Coke being the market leader at P1 with a quantity of demand at Q1, point A. And Pepsi will follow Coke with a similar price, providing a quantity of demand as well. So they're going to price at, let's say, P3 with a quantity of demand at Q3. Here is point C. So if Coke decides to raise price from P1 to P2, their quantity of demand will fall according to the law of demand. Yes, we know that, but why? From point A to point B, that's a movement along their demand curve. And why is the quantity of demand decreasing? Coke raises price and experience a reduction in the quantity of demand. Why? Because these consumers can switch to the cheaper alternative of Pepsi. They're going to switch over to this alternative here. And that keeps the demand curve for Coke downward sloping because there's an alternative available, so the quantity of demand for Coke is being reduced. So Pepsi will experience an increase in their overall demand curve from D2 to D3 while they hold price constant at P3. Because they are now the cheaper alternative. They're holding that price constant and they experience an overall increase in the quantity of demand from Q3 to Q4 along a new demand curve, even though they have not changed price. Price is constant at P3. So that's the substitution effect. And we can also illustrate it the other way. Again, let's say, for example, that Coke starts off with a price of P1. Actually, let's erase this and this. This and this, and just relabel here. Let's say that Coke starts off with a price of P1 and they lower price to P2, going from point A to point B. Quantity of demand increasing from Q1 to Q2. And let's have Coke have a similar price, but they maintain that high price. So let's imagine that P2 is similar to P1. Here we go here. All right, so we have this demand curve by Pepsi. And they're going to have a similar price to Coke. Let's say it's this P3 here. their quantity of demand at Q3, point C. And this is their demand curve D2 equal to marginal benefit 2. If Coke lowers price from P1 to P2, they will experience an increase in the quantity of demand from Q1 to Q2, movement from point A to point B, because they are now the cheaper alternative. Coke is the cheaper alternative. Pepsi's maintained this higher price of P3. So people who are consuming Pepsi are now going to gravitate towards Coke. They're going to leave this market and move towards the cheaper alternative of Coke. And thus, Pepsi's overall demand curve is going to decrease from D2 to D3. Again, equal to marginal benefit 3. And they're going to have an overall reduction in the quantity of their consumption of Pepsi from Q3 to Q4, even though they're maintaining the price of P3, because P3 is more expensive than the price of P2. So here we see as price falls and Coke becomes a cheaper alternative, their quantity of demand is going to increase due to this substitution effect. Again, there is a negative causal relationship between price and quantity demanded, because as price falls, as we see here, for a good, consumers will buy more of this now less expensive alternative good, that being Coke lowering price versus Pepsi. And that is the substitution effect. And again, you can use this model for illustrating the non-price determinant of demand, price of related goods, substitutes. Great. That leaves us with the last point. We're now going to look at the income effect here as another underlining assumption for the law of demand. So let's get rid of all this. We're going to draw one last model. And we're going to use the example of Coke again. Okay, so we're going to have a model here. Let's go ahead and label this. We're going to have price. And we're going to have quantity consumed. And we're going to have the market for Coke. So here we have the market demand. Let's say graph A. The market demand for Coke. And let's make that a little bit smaller, much smaller. All right, there we go. All right, so income. Let's talk about income. Income effect relating to income. So income, let's review. Here we have this pile of cash. Let's say that this is income. Symbol for income is Y. Income is generated from the 4 factors of production. Income is generated from the employment of the 4 factors of production. Okay, so for review, we know that labor generates a wage. Other households may also own land resources, and they generate a form of income we call rent. And there might be other households that own capital resources, and they earn a form of income called interest. And I'm running out of space. We have the entrepreneur that organizes land, labor, and capital, and they generate a form of income called profit. Okay. Now let's say that your wages, rent, interest, and profit, whatever form of income you have, is equivalent to $100. You have $100 of fixed income at this point, right? You have fixed income at this point in time of $100. So the consumption or the purchasing power, the power of this $100 to consume is dependent on price. So we're going to have the market demand for Coke. We're going to see demand, again, equals the marginal benefit. And I'll ask students, how many cans of Coke can you consume with $100 when you have, let's say, 1 can of Coke being equal to $1? How many cans of Coke can you buy with $1 if you have $100 of income? So we can buy 100 units. Okay, so let's illustrate that. We have a low price, P1, equal to perhaps $1 per can of Coke, and you can buy 100 cans of Coke with your $100. So here we have quantity 1, and here you have bought 100 units. Fine. What happens then if the can of Coke now is $100 for 1 can of Coke? How many cans of Coke can you buy with your fixed income of $100? Oh, I can only consume 1 unit. So at the higher price of P2, let's say being equal to $100, you can only consume 1 unit. You're at Q2, only 1 can of Coke, you're at point B. That's a movement along the demand curve from point A to B due to a rise in price leading to a reduction in the quantity of demand. Okay, so that is the income effect. Every household at any point in time only has a fixed amount of income, in this case $100, and the purchasing power of that income is dependent on price. If prices are low, you can consume a lot of units at point A. But if due to, let's say, inflation, at the macro level, prices of goods and services are rising over time, and you only have fixed income coming in, your purchasing power is reduced from Q1 to Q2 as prices rise, taking you from point A to point B along your demand curve. Again, income effect being an underlying assumption as to why the demand curve has a downward negative slope. And there we have it. So higher level students, you should be able to explain the underlying assumptions of the law of demand, which includes the law of diminishing marginal utility, includes the substitution effect, and it also includes the income effect. And that's it. If you have any questions, please comment those questions below, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.